so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning. I am very excited about our workshop today. I recently had the opportunity to write my own story, and it was a beautiful experience. I had thought about it for a very long time, just trying to get something down on paper. And not just to get it down on paper, but also to have that healing power of reflecting on my life and giving myself the time to do it. It was a powerful experience. And as I finished up after the 5-week course, I realized that I knew my single mom a whole lot better. And I also knew myself better. And through this experience, I have to say that it was joyous, it was painful, but in the end, it was healing. So it was terrific, and I highly recommend writing. And so I'm so excited to introduce Vicki Atkinson and Wynne Leon, who are on a storytelling mission. Dr. Vicki is the author of this book called Surviving Sue. She's earned degrees in counseling, psychology, and a doctorate in adult and higher education. She's also a licensed counselor and was a dean at Harper College for many years. I'd also like to introduce you to my dear friend, Wynne Leon, who is the author of this beautiful book called, can you see it? Finding My Father's Faith. A little bit about her. She is an optimist and enthusiast of endurance sports and a woman intent on charting her own path. When she was younger, a life of adventure meant climbing mountains, traveling the world, and being an entrepreneur. Today, it was about starting a family as a single parent at age 46, having another child at age 50, and adding a dog, Cooper, it was so cute, and a cat named Simone to the pack. And it's been a beautiful experience to watch this part of her life. Thank you so much for joining us, Vicki and Wynne. I'm so looking forward to our workshop today.
Oh, my goodness. We're thrilled to be here, aren't we, Wynne? And hi,
We
everybody. Good morning.
Good morning. It's so nice to see so many familiar names and faces
Yes. And new
and
friends.
and new friends. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And Joni, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. We won't mention how I got the cat,
No, we won't.
which might have been
Story
from
for
Joni.
another time.
That's a
Yeah.
story for another time. And I'm so glad that you mentioned our books because although we're not speaking in depth about the content of our books, but the process of writing it is foundational to what we're talking about. And it's really similar, to, Joni, to what you just said about writing your story. Joyous, painful, and ultimately healing.
Yes.
So using our creativity through storytelling allows us the power to see things anew, reconsider past challenges and hurdles by allowing ourselves the room to grow, change, and evolve. We believe in unlocking creativity to promote resilience and potential. In essence, Vicki and I both discovered a great deal about ourselves and our ability to be resilient in writing these books. We also uncovered a lot of secrets about living well, secrets about dying, and everything in between. Right after I wrote my book, I was set up on a blind date. And as we shared stories and he told me about his life and I about mine, I mentioned that I'd written a book about my dad because I wanted to unlock the secret of what my dad's such an incredibly joyful person that had a twinkle in his eye all the way up to the end of his life. And as I told that story, the guy leaned in towards me and you could tell he was hooked by the question, but he was never going to read my book. So he leaned in and he said, "Well, what's the secret?" And I just laughed. I didn't have a soundbite answer to that. But today, Vicki and I are here to share those secrets, not in a soundbite, but in our actionable presentation about cultivating resilience through creativity.
Yeah. That's the mission that we're on. And we've got a PowerPoint, so we're going to pull that up and we've got some really fun inquiry exercises and some storytelling to do. And
Right,
thank you,
right.
Joni, so much for that beautiful introduction, and Wynne for setting the stage.
Yeah,
Yay.
and I just wanted to mention a little bit talking about secrets. Vicki wrote her book Surviving Sue, and she grew up with a mom who carried secrets, ultimately incapacitating secrets that triggered her mom's mental health and addiction issues.
Yeah.
So Vicki wrote about her mom to find her own resilience and understanding of the patterns that beset her family. Her
Yeah.
book, Surviving Sue, is a revealing story with an emphasis on intergenerational healing to benefit generations to come.
Yep. And then we can't let this slide go without a mention from me about how important Wynne's book, Finding My Father's Faith, was to me. It is truly, as I describe it to others, the most heartfelt story about a daughter's journey to better understand her father and his generous spirit, encouraging Wynne to find her own path to faith and self-awareness. So Wynne's book is full of inspiration, and I'm grateful for your friendship, Wynne.
Likewise. So glad we're doing this together.
Yep.
So our first slide, we just want to talk about resilience, the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. You know, a lot of the things in our books are about the big picture resilience, but most often I need help with day-to-day resilience. It's my goal to walk through life with clarity and compassion, which is to say, I don't want to add to the confusion or aggression in this world. And a few months ago, I was, working early in the morning, and I got taken to task by somebody I was working for because I used a hyphen in a salutation instead of a comma. I wrote Dear Jack hyphen instead of Dear Jack comma. And this man ripped into me, and I could feel my heat rising in my cheeks, and the hackles rise like, this is what we're going to worry about. And about a half an hour later, I got in the car to drive my 8-year-old somewhere, and it was a mess out there. People were cutting into my lane. Nobody was going fast enough. Nobody was turning on the blinkers. And it seems so obvious in the retelling that the email that I had received was overlaying my experience of driving, because that's not usually my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to laugh and just let it go, because that resilience, recovering from what had previously happened, is so important to going on with the day. And even if self-preservation was my only goal, resilience is key. It keeps me from making things bigger.
Yeah. Well, and Wynne and I recognize that resilience is sort of the buzziest word, especially at the beginning of a new year. But our take on this really comes from something that you all will know and recognize, this philosophy of thinking globally, but acting locally. And Wynne and I would say there's nothing more local than working on yourself kind of from the inside out. So that awareness, I think, of what we're thinking and feeling and what's coming up, just as Wynne described, is so important, because we aspire to be exemplars of this idea of concentric circles of goodness, contributing to a healthier future for ourselves and for those that we care about. And Joni, we couldn't help ourselves. This sweet little image of a plant here, we want it to grow and be supple and flexible and give it a chance. And that's really our wish for all of you. And it's how Wynne and I frame up resilience. But we're going to play, so we hope that you're ready. One of the things that we said in the description for this workshop, and again, thank you, Joni and your team, is that we wanted to provide a hidden gifts exercise. And one of those that we've found to be a surefire method for building awareness and stoking resilience is this idea of a 6-word story. And maybe you've heard of it. Some of our friends that may have joined us today have heard Wynne and I talk about this in a podcast recently, but it's a technique that really has its origins in education, even early childhood education, and from psychology and therapeutic communities. But the idea really is to take the big feelings, and we all have them, and bring them in. This notion of crystallizing what you're thinking and feeling into more manageable nuggets. And it might be feelings or concerns or insights, but brevity is really the key. And I have for my whole life been referred to as very verbal Vicki or very verbose Vicki. So this is, it's a challenge for some of us to do this. And I love that in the past, my students and clients have described this as a pathway to get pocket-sized wisdom. So what a lead up, right? But we're going to invite you to play with us. And we acknowledge too that the example that we've got in the graphic, writing heals and keeps me sane, Wynne and I could have written that for sure, but we didn't. We owe a debt of gratitude to publisher Larry Smith, who really started a movement called 6-Word Memoirs. And there's so much insight and inspiration there, and we'll make sure we're sharing all of those resources with you. But when we love this, and we are going to ask folks to play, right?
We are, and we're not. We can do a question and answer at the end, so
Mm-hmm.
that's our plan. But please write your 6-word stories if feel like it. Put it in the chat. We'll take a look at the end.
Yep.
Or respond after the session.
And the trick is, we will come back to this in just a little bit at the end, but the trick is to not be an editor, and whatever you've got in front of you, it might be a scrap of paper, a Post-it note, a napkin, a crayon. We're going to get quiet for what's going to feel like a really long time in a meeting like this, but maybe about 60 seconds
I think
to
that's
give you
the
a
trick,
chance.
is for
Yeah.
you and I to be quiet for 60 seconds.
Ooh, I know. I joke with Wynne sometimes that we could ask her to do the Jeopardy theme song to hum it, but that might be intrusive, so we won't do that. But really, we are going to get quiet now for a few minutes. And as Wynne said, if you want to put your thoughts about 6-word stories in the chat, we are definitely going to be paying attention to that, and we appreciate your engagement. And now we get quiet.
All right, I think we managed it. I think we managed being quiet for a minute.
We did, and when there are some beautiful examples in the chat, thank you all so much for being bold and sharing. We're so grateful, but ooh, exciting.
That's so great. And I love what you say about that pocket-sized snapshot. It's so manageable. And it leads right into, how does creativity create resilience?
Yeah.
I think for what we recognize is that creativity is so many things. It's gardening, it's cooking, it's parenting, it's writing, it's woodworking, it's troubleshooting. There's
Mhm.
so much creativity that we bring into our lives. But we know from research, and I'm going to quote Brene Brown here, unused creativity is not benign.
Yeah.
It metastasizes. It turns into grief, rage, judgment, sorrow, shame. You noticed I slowed down on judgment because that's the one that it turns in for me.
Mhm.
Your creativity is about finding your joy. And Joni, you highlighted this beautifully at the beginning when you talk about the joy of writing your story. That's what that creativity will bring,
Yeah.
is that ability to see things from a different angle. You have that, just a new vision. And I want to share a story about my 4-year-old Mr. D, who was, the other day, he was angry, and my sisters and I couldn't figure out why. And I don't think he could figure out why. He doesn't have the power of writing yet. He doesn't write or read yet. So he went into his room, and he was in there for a few minutes, and he came back out, and he had a piece of paper, and he crumpled it, and he threw it on the ground. And that was his creative act. And he was fine. He moved on after that. Whatever it meant, I'm not exactly sure, but it was his ability to just take that moment and create something, a ball of paper, and throw it on the floor.
Yeah.
One more quote that I want to add to this conversation is from Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist teacher. You have more possibilities available in each moment than you realize. And that's what we find with creativity, is finding those possibilities.
Yeah. And when I love your example of Mr. D, because I think, all of these exercises and activities that we bring forward today are sort of tested and true, and they span generations, and they're very accessible. And Mr. D, I love that because he was expressing himself as he could. And doing this work, we get that it really is an inside job, wink. We get that, but we believe in the power and the potential. And although it is perhaps overused, we're all a little bit like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. It is within, and that's sort of an overarching belief that Wynne and I have. And when we think about inner exploration, coming from my background, this is really about intrapersonal growth. The things that we do, taking our power, and working on ourselves first. And we know how difficult that is today. There is a daily social media deluge, influencers and pundits and people that want to tell you how to be and how to live. And there is an absorption that I think all of us take in from that, even when we're trying to be selective about our consumption. And Wynne and I would say from our experience, as all of this is today, that really looking outside first rather than going inside and expecting that growth to come from external sources is probably a miss, because you really need to do the work inside out and have some fun if you can. We anchor ourselves often to this quote from Einstein that creativity is intelligence. Some days for us, Wynne, having fun. And that's what we want for you too. Wynne and I
Right.
laugh a lot. We find reasons to see the potential in things, and with humor. And we're grateful that you're interested in spending time with us today as we talk about these things.
Right. Because, Vicki, you have a great point about that inner work, but that inner work, that intrapersonal work really
Yeah.
helps with interpersonal relationships.
Oh my gosh. And it's where the resilience comes from, so that you're not feeling like you're being bounced around, based on how the wind blows, or feedback that you get from someone that you don't value or admire, but it gets in and it influences us and takes away some of our power and potential. So we wish for all of you strength, and we believe it's there. Yeah. So another little bit of insight from Wynne and Vicki this morning. We could easily have called this little query assessment more of a readiness assessment than a reflective, because you'll hear notes of that as we talk through this. But what I just said, yes, we all aspire to have that strength of character and to sort of run our own races. But we also know that we have safety-minded brains, most of us, which means we like the status quo, and I don't want to rock your boat and I don't want to ruffle my feathers. But building resilience and listening to those creative urges, they need time, just like that little plant that we saw at the beginning, so that they can have a chance. But it also means that you're opening yourself up to be vulnerable. So we need to talk about that just a little bit. And we did share that we would peel back some of the who, the what, the when, the where, the why. It's not that we have secrets, but we're learning as we go. And Wynne and I often do that for each other. We build community around supporting ourselves in these efforts. And we're so grateful to Joni and the Revel 11 team for being part of our community in that regard. But I'll tell you that this first query here, noticing patterns in your life and your family's life that are unhealthy, this is definitely something that resonates for me, because it was one of the insights that helped propel me to write about the need for intergenerational healing in my own family and the dysfunction in my mom's life and the impact that it was having on my young adult daughter. And so when I looked at Wynne's book and we talked about vulnerability, we realized that being courageous enough to write the book, that's one thing, but you have to ask the hard questions and be vulnerable to that level of exposure, even with yourself, to get started. And so when we feel that in a very deep way, and psychologists would go, you're talking about congruence, that idea of having your thoughts and feelings match your behavior. And for me, I often think about that as healthy living, and that's who I want to be.
Right.
But when we're inspired by these things, yeah?
That's true. The inner life meeting your outer life. I think for me, as I looked at this list, often I'm an electrical engineer by education. I look at things logically. I work from a to-do list. I'm da 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 da. But listening to those whispers of wisdom internal to me have been absolutely great hallmarks in my life. Those were moments that I needed
Yeah.
to grow to find the secret of the whispers, that flow of life.
Mhm.
And they get more insistent. And I think about, back in the day before I sat my dad down to record his stories, I would the Circle of Life from The Lion King would come on, and I would just start bawling, and I didn't my dad was in fine health. He ultimately
Mhm.
died in a bike accident. It wasn't that I knew that I mean, I knew my dad was gonna die. That part was, pretty obvious, but not then, and I started to need to listen to that inner voice that said, "Circle of life, you need to sit down and take this time." But I had to start trusting that, and that was a creative act, that wasn't a logical one.
Mhm. Yeah, and we know our friends today may add things, good reflective queries that you would add to the list. And so we love that. If you would like to add that into chat as well, I'm keeping an eye, and we're so grateful for the input still about 6-word stories, but maybe we're missing something. Maybe there's another really good reflective query.
Right?
Yep.
And then as we gather those, we talk about, what is this creativity as applied to that reflective self-assessment. We really want to give your mind another way out, or your spirit another way out. Uh, it's a way to see things differently. You're using creativity to sometimes act things out, through tactile options, drawing, painting, crafts. It's whatever sort of helps you surface that creative energy.
Yeah.
Sometimes for me, it's just writing down a piece of dialogue. A while ago, I was sitting in my bedroom with my 8-year-old daughter and my 4-year-old son, and there was a storm outside the window, and my 8-year-old daughter was chattering away as she often does, and we were sitting there talking, and Mr. D turned to her and he said, "Shh, I can't see." And and the moment I captured that line, I didn't know what it meant yet, but just starting with that piece of dialogue, writing it down, and then working on a piece about it, I was like, "Oh, this is all about getting quiet. It's all about creating the conditions to see." And so oftentimes I just start with dialogue. Fortunately, my kids provide me a lot of that to work from. But the secret sometimes is to get there circuitously. You're not necessarily going at it straight away.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you shared about that, Wynne, because sometimes, our powers of observation and literally creating space and doing things that might be counterintuitive, that might seem more difficult, less efficient, building creativity and resilience. This is not about efficiency. And so on that order, we would remind all of you, because we're sure that you're aware, that there are some brain-based benefits to doing some work in longhand. And I'll just mention a couple of those that really jump out at Wynne and I. And again, it's whether it doesn't matter whether you're doing storytelling and writing, or you're gardening, or you're in the maker space, kind of headspace. We know that there are brain-based benefits to doing things by hand. And my all-time favorite study comes from Stanford, Mueller and Oppenheimer in 2013. And Wynne has heard me chuckle about this frequently. The title of their study, it had me at the very get-go. The title is "The Pen is Mightier Than the Keyboard the advantages of longhand over laptop.
I love that you chuckle about things like that, Vicki.
I do. It makes me so happy, right? And this is my friend, Wynne, who's an electrical engineer. I'm not anti-tech. I promise I'm not. But what they describe in their study, and again, we'll provide these resources, is that sometimes doing things the long way, longhand, for example, making things, they describe it as being a desirable difficulty. And I love that phrase because again, we're often thinking about efficiency, but the point that they make is that sometimes we need to be forced into positions where we're not just transcribing, but we're thinking, we're condensing, we're pulling disparate, seemingly, ideas together that might help us with problem solving. And it has connections with memory and language acquisition, obviously imagination and visualization. And it's all this good stuff that happens in the hippocampus that needs training. We need to train it.
Right.
Yeah. And
And
when you and I turn around and we go, oh, there's another story about, longhand
yeah.
versus keyboard.
And I do most of my writing on the keyboard, but sometimes this is just about the trick. It's about
Yeah,
when something's stuck, when we're, feeling any of those things that we notice in our reflective self-assessment. And we're not exactly sure how to get there. As you said so well, Vicki, it's not about efficiency. It is about trying something new. And sometimes that means doing it by hand.
absolutely. And, we couldn't have said it better than Mary Oliver, who said, keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable. Yes. Yes. The thing you can't yet conceive of, but it's waiting for you. Ooh, we love that. And so again, revealing a little bit more of what works for us, we have confessed, for us that really writing is our thing. But there is a timing aspect to all of this. And Wynne and I would both say to you that this notion of writing to heal, not to wound, Joni did a beautiful job of describing that at the very beginning in her introduction. And we pull from, brilliant psychologists like Dr. James Pennebaker, whom we love, that wrote a book. It's called Opening Up by Writing It Down. There are terrific works out there from authors writing about the memoir genre, Carrie Cohen and Melissa Phoebos, for example. It is important to consider timing, but it's also important to give yourself the time to heal without having a vengeful heart. But in the end, when, this consideration of doing it, at some point we have to get off the starting block. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, we've done, more than 50 podcasts with great creative people. And I think about Elizabeth, who's on here today. I mean, she talks about starting, she talks about bouncing between things when we get
Yeah.
stuck. So, if you're writing and you can't, then you play the flute. But all of them, the secret from all of them is you
Yeah.
just have to start.
Yeah.
Because if you don't try, you don't get anywhere. And Vicki, you and I are masters of just trying things.
Oh my gosh, we are. And we'll reveal a little bit more about that in a moment. But we also know that if we can give you a takeaway today, if you go back to that 6-word story, we have found in working with others that that might be the gateway to your motivational mantra. It might be just enough jet fuel to get you rolling. And it may find itself, weaving into your why, which we know is important as well. No one wants to do anything unless they understand the why.
Right. Well, and that's how things stick. If we know why we're doing them, they tend to stick a little bit better. I know,
Absolutely.
my motivational mantra is actually 7 words, but, close enough. And it's you have to be present to win. And this is the thing that I
Mm,
find in my parenting over and over again. You have to be present to win. And this is one of the ways that I stay grounded. I stay in the moment. I, capture what's going on. It helps me not to get overwhelmed by just the day to day.
yeah, yeah, it matters. And going back to that idea of concentric circles of goodness, the micro and the macro, and what we aspire to add love and light and lift. This is how we do it. And we avoid adding to what you described at the beginning with the hyphen police. We want to avoid, adding, more frustration.
Right.
Or what Madeline said, our truest response to the irrationality, of the world is to paint or sing or write, but
Yep.
do something.
Do
Yeah,
something.
do
It's a great,
something.
great, which leads wonderfully into this next slide, which is I can't. Which is there are a lot of reasons we can't do these things. We feel that, we get it. I don't
Yeah.
have time. That's my big one. Life is busy, and time is a hard thing to capture. I'd say this. When I made a practice of writing, I stopped watching TV in the evening to go to bed early, to get up earlier so that I could add writing to my meditation and yoga time in the morning. And it's
Yeah.
become so critical for me. Um, and that's hard, but speaking of time, wandering around in confusion land isn't particularly efficient either. This helps to get to the heart of things, by being busy doing the right things.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I love about, Wynn's practice in the morning is that her children are watching her, make these choices, right? When you're not doing this, with cloak and cover, they see how mom is using her time. And I think when we demonstrate that to those around us, there's always an audience, someone is
Hmm.
watching. And I think that's so powerful to lead by example.
Mm.
But the one on this list, I've got one that really is a bugaboo for me. But what were you about to say, Wynne?
Well, I was going to say, talking to my kids about this, Miss O was saying the other day that nobody played with her on the playground during
Mm,
recess. And, I started to go into are you sure?
mhm,
And then I realized, oh, wait, let's get at this another way. And I said, do the inner hurts or the outer hurts? Which one is
mm,
harder?
mhm,
And they both thought about it. Mr. D added his own example because Amelia told him that he was copying or something like that. So he had his own inner hurt, his own 4-year-old version. And they thought about it, and Miss O came up with, well, those outer hurts are easier to deal with. The inner hurts, it's harder to come up with a plan for.
mhm. See, wisdom from the little ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should have had Miss O with us today. Maybe we should go stand down, right? Maybe so. And
Maybe so.
maybe I know, but you have coached me in the past because this one, the yucky factor is
Mm,
too high. I feel that one, on a palpable level. I don't like trying new things if I think there's a chance, even a chance, that someone's going to see me sweat or heaven forbid, kind of see me struggle. I don't want to look foolish. And those kind of blockades and barriers, often get in my way. I'm very risk averse. And there are lots of reasons for that. But we love the Seth Godin quote about being bold and being brave.
mhm.
But when I'm going to put you on the spot because you have a Serena Williams story that I adore,
Right. Yes.
because it demonstrates that boldness and the reminder that on a day when you need it, you might be able to channel some chutzpah
Right.
from Serena Williams. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, Serena Williams, especially at the end of her career, she'd show up at the major tennis tournaments, which were 2 weeks long. She'd show up not quite ready, not quite fit enough.
Yeah.
And she would play her way to fitness as she won the tournament. And it was an amazing thing to watch because she just showed up and tried.
Mhm.
Obviously, she's an incredibly talented athlete and has done an incredible amount of work. But still, as she showed up for those tournaments, she wasn't quite ready, and she'd still show up anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know that there are a lot of people that have strong reactions in a way that's similar to this idea of I'm not creative. Don't ask me. Those are the talented people, the people in the performing arts, the elite athletes that know how to really get the best out of their bodies. And we would say,
Yeah,
everyone is creative.
right, right. As Brene Brown says, unused creativity is not benign; it metastasizes.
Yep. Yep. So I got a little more inspiration, again, a little bit more insight for whatever that's worth from Wynne and I. And this list of kind of inspiring ideas, we can, I can kind of starting with the individual, kind of look at potential barriers. I'd shared before that Wynne and I have a connection about writing about family members and sharing our secrets and telling stories. But one of the points that we love sharing with others is there is this notion that, looking back is not a good idea, that it doesn't propel you forward. And we would challenge that a little bit and say that really that rear view mirror in a considered way, it does matter because it is a potent place for growth. And Wynne and I often talk about that as being scaffolding for the future, literally reaching into the future. And, for me, my mom had a lot of facets. Some were destructive, some of them were remarkable and endearing, but wanting to preserve that family history and get it right to the extent that I could, and not just write about my pain, was an important part of my journey. But we see that in others too. There's a reticence to look back. But
Yeah.
I love wisdom that you offer when you often tell me, but be active about it, take fear and turn it into love.
Right. And Joni said this perfectly as she talked about writing her story. it's it's hard to do, but you understand yourself
Yeah.
and your family members potentially better. And when you
Mm-hmm.
do that, you can it makes the future and going forward, you become more personally responsible.
Yeah, absolutely true. And we know as we put these lists up that, we may be missing things. So if you see something that's an insight that is very potent for you, we would love for you to share. But we also know that, life is full of fear. But finding our way to compassion is something, again, as we think about doing the inside work, but also the greater good. We're on a mission because all of that reverbs. It
Hmm.
reverbs.
Does.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Here we are again. 6 word stories. Oh my. So back at the beginning, we said this morning that we love the idea of spending time with you with, the idea that perhaps we could encourage you to harness your creativity through storytelling or whatever works well for you. But with the goal really being the opportunity to see things anew and consider past challenges perhaps in a new way. And we hope that you played along and wrote a 6 word story, but we'd love for you to grab that if you have it in front of you and continue putting your thoughts, in chat if you like. But when we do this activity with others, one of the cross checks, and you can give it some breathing room. It can be a few minutes which is what we've done today, or it could be a week or two. But circling back to your 6 word stories to ask the questions, does it inspire? Does it inform? Would you change it? Would you write another? I've seen some of my students and clients in the past who will take their 6 word stories and turn them into couplets. And all of a sudden they're poets and they're writing prose. And so however you go about that, we encourage you to use what works for you, and certainly inclusive of what Mr. D does. Crumple that little guy up and throw it away. If you just want to be done with it, that's okay too. But that's really our hope, right, Wynne?
Absolutely. There's all sorts of ways to be creative about being creative. But I love what you say about harnessing your creativity through the power of storytelling. And it just gives us that way to see the past challenges in a different light,
Yeah.
and unlock that potential for being creative
Yeah.
and telling your story in a different way.
Yep. Absolutely.
So we're going to move to questions. One note before we do that, all the things that we've talked about, the resources, we have a handout. And when Joni and Ruth send out the notes from this, they're going to include that. Feel free our website for our training about creativity is creativecore.com. If you have an email, you can send it to inquiries@creativecore.com. All that information is going to be in the in the follow-up email, as well as the resources. And we have an exercise. So love 6-word stories, but we also added a different exercise that we're going to send out in that resource follow-up.
Yeah, and that exercise is something that you can sit down and like run through it like wildfire, or you can savor it. And it's something that I have used for decades in my work with others, and that Wynne and I really, really think is applicable and might be helpful. So kind of keep the goodness train in motion. And we encourage you to definitely stay in touch and use the resources. And just we're so grateful. Joni, we're so grateful.
Well, I love the goodness train in motion. I mean, I love ending on that.
Choo choo.
That little choo-choo quote. I love that. I'm going to take that with me all day long.
Yay.
So let's thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I love how my story changed specifically from step out, step in, and step up to
Beautiful.
live life fully with compassion and joy, which is really what I've been thinking a lot about lately. And I think it would be really nice right now to take some questions and maybe read off some of the stories that people have wanted to tell here. And if you have any questions, we have about 10 minutes. If you have questions for Wynne and Vicki. So some of the, I love how someone did say, when I don't know if you saw this or not, but everyone calls my dad Mr. D.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Eco said, wrecked and grieved, then keep forward.
Jody, say that one again.
Wrecked and grieved, then keep forwarding.
Mm-hmm.
New adventures distract from dark rooms. It's very powerful. Colliding, competing, kaleidoscope of amazing possibilities. Thanks, Michelle. Look forward, learn from the past. Thank you, Anne. Pushing through helps my brain heal. Lori, that's beautiful.
Gosh.
Building my life makes me nervous. I mean, there's so many heartfelt 6 words there that go together, and I'm sure that all of us can relate to in one way or another. What's your take on that?
Well, I have to jump in and say, I love, Mia, what you said, everything. Thank you, all of you, for contributing in chat. But Mia, when you wrote Evolving Healing, Coming to Myself, Wynne, you haven't seen that one?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Oh my goodness. Love that.
What I love that is these capture so much of the present moment, but also, where we're going forward with it. And that's the
Yes.
great part about these pocket-sized pieces of wisdom, is that they do both. They say, okay, here I am. I'm showing up, and for other people to see me, and I'm also setting my intention for going forward.
Wonderful. Junk formulas make objects of art. You're right, Peg, they do.
Love that.
Well, I think this has been such a fabulous reminder about the importance of writing, and more importantly, is taking time for yourself to do that. And again, one thing that I learned from my own experience in this in writing my story was that, it was a 5-week course, and I am definitely a stress eater. So I found that out even more because, things would come up for me that were so deep within me about my upbringing. And I had to process. It was a lot of processing during that 5-week period. And a lot of joy in ultimately learning to understand who my mom really was. Like I had, I'm almost 60 years old, and here I am still processing things that my mom, did or didn't do in her life, or who she was or who she wasn't. And I walked away, actually, it's funny that there's this little thing I have right here with so much love for her and her life, and what it was and what it wasn't, and what I had hoped for her, but that it was all okay.
Yeah.
it was an amazing experience, as I mentioned, when we first started. It makes me cry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I see that all the emotion
yeah.
comes up. And, thank you
Mhm.
for that, Joni. And Amber just said compassion offers light to dark places. That's such
Absolutely.
a beautiful, echo of what you just said, Joni, because I think we carry those things with us. Wynne and I often talk about we pack our bags, for decades and we lug
Great.
things along. But feeling inspired and also brave enough to start thinking about and asking questions, those things, they can happen in isolation and there's good growth that can come there. But what you've done with Revel 11 and creating these forums and communities for people to come together and share some of those common concerns about looking at history and understanding and making meaning, there's glory in all of that for each of us to just be the best of who we can be.
Thank you for that. And I do have to say the reason why I started Revel 11 was in legacy to my mom. So, and that's a story within itself. But I want to thank you both so much, Vicki, for surviving Sue. Beautiful story of learning and growth and generational healing, which I'm very intrigued by. And then Wynne, Finding My Father's Faith. They're both beautiful books, and I know that you will garner so much insight in your own life from reading them. And I want you to talk a little bit, do you have some upcoming classes? Again, we're going to send out how to stay engaged with both of you, but just as a wrap, why don't you again tell people how to stay in touch?
Yeah, so we're for curating some content other than writing. We work with an artist named Libby Saylor who does collage art mostly. So we're creating some a course with her, as well as some of the other courses that we do and deliver corporately, about creativity, about problem solving, about bringing teams together. So we're doing that as well. Again, best way to get a hold of us is inquiries at creativecore.com. We're going to send out the resources. We have a podcast that we put out every week on Fridays. We are love to stay in touch and be part of this ongoing community of people that are
Absolutely.
asking the
Yes. And
questions.
we'll send out more information to you today. For Revel 11, please join us as we have more upcoming events. We have a conversation on the 7th, right around the corner, Energy Rising, the Neuroscience of Leading with Emotional Power. And we want to make that not just about leading at work, but leading in your personal life as well. So it will be a dynamic conversation. And I'm very interested in neuroscience. So let's dive deep into that. We also do have Ingrid Ricks coming back on a storytelling workshop that you can also find on our site. And then we have some upcoming events that aren't posted yet here in Seattle. And then we are just doing the final arrangements on an international trip to Sicily in October, which will be around culture, women in business, women in wineries, and just being together as women traveling and exploring something new. Thank
Wow.
you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you very soon, and you can go to revel11.com for all the information on our organization.